Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. I am your host, Dr. Owen Campbell, and with me, as always, is Dr. Brian Wolf, and this is presented by Physio Growth. Physio Growth is our mastermind group where we host Q&As, we have modules that'll help people out, really just trying to make sure that good business advice from real owners is getting to a lot of people as opposed to gatekeeping it. So if you want to check that out, check us out at physio-growth.com. And we also have a school group, which you can look at in the description, either on YouTube or the podcast, where all fine podcasts are sold. And obviously, we have a relaxed Brian Wolf with us today,
I know.
coming to us from
I,
his
I'm
couch.
probably going to be very surly today because, to get this technology to work was not fun. And so now
Yeah.
we got it going. I'm sitting on the couch doing this, and so I'm.
And then, of course, I said, let's do a podcast about technology. So,
Just to rub the salt in my fucking wound. Exactly,
so
exactly.
oh wow, we haven't even hit the minute mark, and I'm gonna have to put explicit on this
I know.
podcast. This is great. All
Nice,
right,
exactly.
so we're gonna be talking about remote therapeutic monitoring. RTM is typically what you will see. Anybody looking at their practice owners, some practice owners are all over this, right? Others are like, what is that? What does that mean? So, to give a very brief overview, remote therapeutic monitoring is something that Medicare started allowing, and of course, you know how Medicare. If Medicare does something, then everybody will eventually allow it. And what it is an effort to try and get people to get into to do their exercises, essentially, right? Is to remotely monitor if they're doing all the follow up that any good therapist knows is pretty necessary for you to be able to progress in a program, right? So, of course, if you've spent any time around the interwebs or you have a functioning email that's linked to physical therapy, you've probably gotten some cold calls, cold emails. You've probably seen some podcasts about the topic of remote therapeutic monitoring. Now, it's not something I typically interact with on a daily basis. I know my previous employer, they are doing it. Um, and they have about 900 clinics. So they put a very big investment into this. But then I brought up the topic with Brian, and he's like, I don't know. I got some thoughts on that. So, Brian, what are you
Yeah.
guys doing with
So
evolution? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
yeah. So I guess the first thing I would say to you, Owen, is explain exactly what it is, because I feel like that's look. PSA, I don't know a ton about it. And I think the thing, because I don't know a ton about it, is what's my first reaction, that is a lot of times like I'm a little bit of skeptic,
Yeah.
right?
So,
But again, it sounds like, again, from what I loosely understand, is patients who have Medicare, now we're making sure they're doing their stuff by not phone calls, but we're doing it by like Zoom, right? Or by
so, so good question, right? So the biggest thing is there's a spectrum, right? You could very much just say, I'm going to make my PTs when they have a cancellation call the patients that are Medicare and call them and say, Mrs. Smith, are you doing your exercises? Fantastic. Yes, she is. Write it down, bill a unit, right?
Mhm.
All the way down to there are AI remote therapeutic monitoring systems that are out there now, right? So there's a lady from Y Combinator thing. She contacted me about it. And basically, her whole thing was that they don't even need a therapist on the phone. Everything is basically just doing it through AI, and they feel they can get that reimbursed. That it's a technology providing the service of keeping these people on track. My previous employer, what they do is they have a big deal with Limber, which I think is Rick Gowenda's backed them or something. But basically, what it is they hire a PTA who does remote work, and you as the therapist type in your exercises into their program. Then the PTA basically is a live chat for somebody so that they can use a person, right?
Okay.
And then that person, that PTA, is technically an employee of that company, and then they are billing that code, right? So it's a way that technology is trying to get into the PT space, or PTs are trying to leverage technology. And then, of course, the age old question of, will Medicare pay for this, right? So
Yeah.
when you have AI, the question is, it's not a human, right? Like, they're not going to reimburse for somebody's time when there's no human. But then on the far other side, where you're making therapists call people, well, is that worth the turnover you might get, where all of a sudden you can't work on your notes, you got to call and
Yeah.
wait for Mrs. Jones to tell you her life story? Like, those are the things that um, practice owners are kind of facing now in the insurance world, right? And then eventually in the cash only world, they'll, some people, this is kind of part of what they do, right? They'll
Yeah.
text you, they'll have something set up. Others, it'll be something that, in a few years down the line, it might be a patient expectation.
Yeah, I think to your point, there's a lot to unpack there, right? I think
Yeah.
when it comes to the idea behind it, I listen, I'm always going to be something where if we're trying to implement new systems like this, if it has anything to do with a one to many model, meaning I'm treating multiple people at once, that's always going to make you more money, which ultimately is something we're trying to figure out is how do we keep stacking that, or how do we maximize people's schedules to the point where they are not losing out on reimbursement in some capacity, right? So to your point about what the idea behind, all right, we're going to fill your schedule, and with that, then you're going to make sure you're calling those people and you're going to bill a unit. My history with Medicare is that there's no fucking way that Medicare is going to pay for this shit. Just like my idea, right? Like think about this, Owen. Think about our careers, right? Like
Yeah.
there, you're telling me that an AI bot is calling, we're going to bill Medicare, and they're going to let that fly? Like no chance. When this Medicare cuts, now, that being said, if that works, jump on that bandwagon. Because
Yeah.
if AI works and there's a one to many model, I would put that in tomorrow. Because the
Yeah.
reality is like that to me makes a lot of sense. Whereas like my worries, like for Safe Revolution, our company, like what we've done that I think is really smart is we've put in professional fees around some of the stuff we've done. So like there's wellness fees and like some of the stuff we get for recovery services, and they're just a subscription based that's a weekly
Mhm.
model, and we can now tinker with this and we'd call our state guidelines, so do that stuff. And like there's no jurisdiction over any of this stuff, and more people are getting interested in like professional fees and wellness fees
Yeah.
that you can then charge clients. That's basically like a way to combat some of the stuff that's going on with insurance reimbursement and whatnot. Whereas like, for me to bill a unit of Medicare and say I get 20-25 bucks, like, yeah, that's super lucrative. If you can, if each one of my therapists could do that, 3 or 4 times to fill part of their schedule, like that's not the client per day per PT. Like it's really smart idea. But now it's out of work for that therapist. Like, does that drive the therapist out of the clinic? Is that something they don't want? Right. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's incentives you could build around that business and what you could do from that perspective. Now you're hiring a PTA. That person doesn't know who that PTA is. Like you're pissing off patients, right?
Mhm.
I can understand that. Like if there's anything that Medicare has taught me, Medicare will essentially make sure that there's a one-on-one type of thing with the patient. And
Yeah.
so that's the problem with Medicare that's not scalable, right? So when you think about this, like again, I think the AI thing is really smart, but I also think that the government is going to be like, no, that's not going to work.
And that was my big hang up when I spoke with her is just as I said, look, I understand that you feel it's going to get reimbursed, but this is Medicare and PT we're dealing with. Like they are
Yeah,
looking for fraud as much as you can. They're finding ways that if they don't have to pay for it, they won't. Um, but that being said, if they can prove it, right, then heck yeah, right? How
yeah,
many times, I mean, I think phone calls can be reimbursed from doctors' offices if like a PA does it, right? And it can be at like a physician rate. There's a lot of things like our techs can't call patients and say, "How are you doing?" and we can bill that. It was
yeah,
one of the first owners I ever met. I was a student. And he said, "You know why the system's one of the big things that's jacked up against PTs if you're going to start a practice?" He said, "Because a physician gets paid for a phone call. We don't, right?
yeah,
So this is essentially us getting paid for a phone call, which would be awesome, right?"
yeah.
Um,
And I bet,
so
by the way, and I bet there's a way to do that, right? I bet, like in terms of, like I said, this like therapy remote monitoring. Like if you're starting, like I could see a scenario where, you're calling patients, checking out how they're doing, and just like doing documentation for it.
yeah,
But again, like these notes, what's going on with this Medicare stuff. Like it's not now we've just thrown more work on a PT's plates for what? A unit? So we're
yeah.
talking about 25 bucks, $25 per person. I get when you look at the bigger picture, bigger line, that's going to make sense. But listen, ATI just went out of business. I don't know if you saw that. That's probably something we should also chat
Oh,
about.
did they officially go out?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they just filed for bankruptcy. So the reality is
Ah,
like,
so they're going to
so,
redistribute. Yeah,
so here's the type of shit
yeah. The
that
stock price is like a
like,
penny.
yeah, exactly. So here's the type of stuff. All right, cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to piss off PTs. And I bet what happened to ATI is now they can't get any talent, and they ultimately
Yeah.
can't make any money. And so when you can't make any money, what do you think
They
happens? You go out
also
of
they
business.
also had a pretty bad IPO and the way that they ran it. There's a lot of stuff in there, but
Yeah, of course.
the
That's something we can unpack in another episode. But I
yeah,
think when
don't
it
go
comes
public
to
if you're a PT company.
yeah, well, it's
Lesson
not even
learned.
that. It's like understand what is important on the innovation space. So again, like I think that AI and a one-to-many model can work really well, but Medicare has been very specific about not ever liking that. So
Yeah.
why would that change now? And again, keep in mind, so a PSA to anybody out there, if someone called me and said, "Hey, this is what we're doing and we think it's going to work," and you're going to pay the AI company, realize the AI company has not, like, if I were this company, I'd say, no problem. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you 10% of whatever I make on Medicare,
Yeah.
even if I'm going to pay them more. So if they're like, it's $300 a month, blah, blah, I'd be like, not good enough. I was like, I'll pay you 10% of whatever I make. The
Yeah.
reality,
Okay.
3 grand, they make a 300, they make $300. If I
Yeah.
make 10 grand, they make $1,000. So I was like,
Yeah.
I'll work something out with you, but I'm not putting risk on myself. Like,
Yep.
they share the risk with me. So I would do something like along those lines with these companies, and so that the people that complain, because in that scenario, or same thing with any therapist, it's like, I want to work from home. I'll do this for you. I'd be like, no problem. You write the notes. You check up with all the people. I'll pay you 10% of whatever we get. We can track it through your
Mhm.
numbers, and whenever we get reimbursed for it, we'll pay it.
Yeah, and I think the important thing too is to think about anybody owning a practice right now at different scales, right? So
Yes.
obviously this is more of an insurance conversation. So anybody, cash pay, they may be tuning out a little bit. But this is a classic kind of management question too. Like, what's your vibe like? What's your culture like? Do you have people that'll happily pick up the phone to check on Mrs. Smith because they would have done it anyway? Um, do you allow them that space, or are they dying in documentation and they're going to look at you as just adding an extra thing for more money? This is where, threading the needle, knowing exactly what your size is. Like I said, with that 900 clinic company, they spent 2 years probably just testing this in different markets and asking the therapists, where are they at, what do you think about this, going with compliance, talking to people in Medicare, like all the stuff. So they put all that work into it. Whereas, AI may be a great option for somebody who's like, I'm busy, but I want that extra unit, so I'm less busy, or I can raise my prices, whatever it is. And if it doesn't work, okay, like you're one of 5,000 customers. It's not like they're going to take your license. They're just
Yeah.
going to say, oh, okay, just give me my money back. Okay, cool. Like, but if it works, then great. So that's where, as an owner, I really think people have to think about when they're looking at RTM, remote therapeutic monitoring. They have to kind of fit what works with their vibe and their practice.
Yeah, I would tell people too, like for instance, I don't understand enough about it. I would
Yeah.
want to do a ton of research on it, bounce it off my employees, bounce it off people. I would want to like
Yeah.
really dive into it. On the cash based side, I would now some alternatives. On the cash based side, I would totally just like raise your prices and do this, right?
Yeah.
Like make sure they're doing that because so it could
Yeah.
check in, right? I wouldn't necessarily bill per time you do it. I
Yeah.
would just make it. I'm going to call you. We're going to talk. We're going to
Well,
chat. I would look into stuff where you could do that, right?
and
I
this
mean,
will be good because if it does, like, hopefully, I mean, let's be honest, if insurance paid cash pay rates, like, all of us would take insurance, right? So,
yeah,
like, or most of us would. I mean, there's
yeah,
obviously, but you can use that as a leverage and say, okay, the local hospital by me, their average reimbursement per patient's 130, the
yeah,
private clinic's 100, but now they're both doing RTM. So really they're at 150 and 110. So
yeah,
instead of my price being 175, because I'm already doing that, it's
yeah,
200, right? Because for $50 more, you get all the other stuff that in
yeah.
home, blah, blah, blah.
It,
So you can use it as a comparison as well.
No, I would say the way that you've proposed this to me, like
Yeah.
just in this way, the way that I think a model would be really smart is if you found like a PTA who wanted to do this from home. That to me
That's
makes
that's
sense.
what the big
Yeah,
company's doing is
that
Limber
that
is the company they're
that
using for that,
that
yeah.
to me makes sense because honestly, that PTA because here's the other thing you talk about AI is like billing through a license number, right?
Yeah,
You can't just AI can't just have an NPI number, any of those things. But the
yeah,
thing about NPI is that or an AI is that obviously you don't have to pay an AI. So the
yeah.
reality is like when it comes to like a PTA, you can pay them a salary and they can work from home and basically you say, all right, like, and I know there's some companies that are doing stuff that's online and like they're doing workers comp and other things like that. Like
Yeah.
it's something that you could definitely experiment with and take a look at. A company like ours would crush it with that because you could call all the patients and bill it.
I was gonna
The
say you got
question
5 clinics, you hire 1 PTA, and that person would just be a work from home 40,
exactly.
50K a week,
And,
whatever it
and
is,
what
or
I would do is
50K a year.
that's a person I would actually put some productivity people on stuff
Yeah,
on because I think in reality, like you want to protect yourself, that person just like dicking off at home, right? Not doing
Yeah.
anything. So yeah, sorry for the explicit language.
You're
Like,
fine.
you
You
caught me,
screwed it in the first
you
minute.
caught, yeah, no, you caught me hot and bothered. But I would say, like, from a perspective of bringing somebody in, that to me actually makes some sense, because that employee is signing up for that job. And
Yeah.
so in reality is, and then here's the thing: say that person quits, you just kind of like dissolve that that initial process, and that's just a
Yeah.
thing you're no longer providing. Just the again, like, do a bunch of research on it, understand what it is.
Mhm.
Just because it's new doesn't mean it's perfectly good. And I mean, something you can put in perspective is like, again, we charge the professional fee and wellness fee as like a weekly fee. Like, you could charge, a couple dollars per week, even up to 10.99 a week, where
Yeah.
basically, like, that's part of it. Like, we'll call you, we're gonna email you, we're gonna
Yep.
make sure we give you home exercise programs. Like, these are all things that aren't reimbursed by people's insurance. And so the thing is, like, if you talk to your state, like the state of Connecticut was very clear to us. They're like, not only do we not like frown upon that or tell you we don't even have jurisdiction over anything like that. So say a client was like, oh, I got this and that. We don't even have jurisdiction over any of that stuff. That has
Yeah.
nothing to do with the facility, has nothing to do with insurance contracts. These are all outside services that we always provide for free. And so to do something like that, you could do that. So anyway, that's a way that I would do it with insurance. But again, to people out there, if they want to talk about this kind of stuff in depth, they can talk about it with us at Physio Growth. And so if you're interested in talking with this process with us, check out physio-growth.com. We talk about this types of stuff all the time. We do different coaching. We would set something up. Like, this is something that me and Owen will chat about, and how to set it up and how to work on it. And again, like, these are processes that we, dive into. So it's cool. I mean, these are definitely things that we'll learn how to do and figure out for our clinics and for businesses.
Nice, man. All right.
Cool.
Well, that's the end of it. Have a
Sounds
good
good,
one.
man. You too, bud. See ya.